Hey, my friends, let's roll the title.
Converging paths. Converging paths.
Welcome once again to the Converging Paths podcast. Yes, already got a comment. Great groovy tunes. Yes, that's those tunes were created by Jeff McAllister, who was a great audio guy with Netflix, actually. And we've got a very special episode for you this evening. We are finishing up the last of a 7-part series called 7 Letters to 7 Churches of Revelation. And this evening, we've really kind of had a wild ride with this one as we looked at these first century churches who were going through various struggles as the Romans were persecuting Christians in those days pretty heavily, and different people had different responses to that persecution. I mean, everybody was a bit traumatized by it, and we have these letters that were written by this bishop, probably named John of Patmos, who claims to have had this revelation, and part of that involved channeling the Spirit of Jesus, he says, and messages specifically to these 7 churches. You can make your own decision about how this whether this is Jesus or not. What I find interesting is that these letters actually, they're written to very specific churches in their time, in this very specific historical context. I would assert John was not trying to predict some end times that wouldn't happen for thousands of years later. Actually, he was speaking very much in code language to these churches in their day about real issues they were facing, and had to write in code because he was talking about the eventual fall of the Roman Empire, and he's imprisoned by the Romans. So he couldn't just simply write overtly about what he's talking about, but his churches would understand. And yet, even though he's writing specifically to his day, it is truly surprising how much wisdom is contained in these letters that can guide us today, especially as we've been tracing this this development from Christianity 2.0 into Christianity 3.0. We're kind of in this kind of gooey cocoon phase right now, just like a caterpillar when it goes down and it just kind of it melts into this ooze, and then there's these imaginal cells that appear that contain the DNA of the new animal, but they're attacked originally at first by the old DNA, the old cells, because they don't recognize that DNA. But as those imaginal cells clump together, and they begin to form patterns that become pretty much unstoppable. Right now, we are in the clumping phase of Christianity 3.0, and we're taking a moment to look back at Christianity 1.0 churches and asking, what were they going through? And we're finding there's a lot of similarities between then and now, and a lot of wisdom that they had. We're looking at this one church now as we end our series, the Church of Laodicea, and this church that the Spirit of Jesus in this letter says, you make me sick. It's not exactly what you want to hear about your church. I can't imagine being the leader of that church. Like, oh, what does Jesus say? We got his name on our door. You make me sick. We'll get into that. But Laodicea was about 100 miles inland in the western coast of what is now modern day Turkey. So we've got some interesting stuff ahead. But I want to first note that the Converging Paths podcast is brought to you by the Eden Tree Foundation, which employs present and emerging technologies for spiritual exploration and growth while fostering interfaith understanding, empathy, and community. We're also sponsored by Darkwood Brew at darkwoodbrew.org, which has produced the world's largest collection of small group video resources for the Christian pluralist movement. That is, those of us who claim fully the path of Jesus without denying the legitimacy of other paths that God creates for humanity. Finally, Darkwood Brew is also brought to you by, Passaguero Beach Community Church on beautiful St. Pete Beach, Florida, which is not looking quite as beautiful these days because of the 2 hurricanes that recently impacted it. By the way, we are streaming live to Facebook today, so good evening, Mark and Kathleen, too. Good to see you online. Good to see Heidi and Stacy on Zoom, too. And as people continue to join us, I'm excited to be able to be streaming live in the Facebook venue. I want to start tonight with a story. Actually, a story took place in my teens. The first time I ever rappelled, and it was over a 100-foot cliff. I was out with a guy who was climbed, a very expert climber with the Seattle Mountaineering Club. We were actually going out without my parents' knowledge. He'd asked my parents if he could take me out rappelling and rock climbing, and my parents said no. And, we kind of went anyway. And we got up to the top of this cliff, and I was pretty nervous, I'll admit. There was this nice, gentle breeze flowing through my hair and tugging on my T-shirt, but that only made me more anxious. It didn't cool me down any. It was like I was standing right on the lip of this cliff, and I didn't want to go over. Now, I was protected. I had the climber's harness securely fastened around my waist. I had the rope was securely fastened to a tree, and a braking mechanism was threaded through that in my hand. And I had the rock climbing shoes. I had the chalk in my hands to make sure the rope wouldn't slip. All that stuff. I had the gear, but I still couldn't get out of my mind this picture of me at the bottom of that cliff, kind of flayed out, having fallen, a rope snapped, and then just kind of this frayed rope kind of laying over me like a death shroud. My heart was beating pretty fast. Well, I decided I trained too much to just not do it, and I figured that this climbing friend of mine, he knew what he was doing, and he assured me I'd be safe. And so I'm like, okay, I'm ready. What do I do? And he said, well, first of all, turn your back towards the cliff and keep your rope tight. Then lean out slowly over the cliff and lean out until your legs are perpendicular to the ground, or perpendicular to the cliff face. I'm like, what? I get out there a little bit and I'm just freaking out. I mean, it takes a lot of nerve. You've never done this before. You got this thin little rope and you are leaning out over the cliff, trusting that this rope is going to hold, and everything in your body is screaming out, this is wrong. Do not do this. Nevertheless, he's like, perpendicular. I'm like, you mean like perpendicular? He goes, yes. So I lean out and I get just a little bit more like a 45 degree angle, not 90 degrees. And I kind of think, well, that's good enough. I start trying to make my way very awkwardly down this cliff, and it was not fun. I was kind of freaking out. And he calls out to me saying, hey, Eric, no, trust me, you've got to go perpendicular. Otherwise, all of the weight is on the balls of your feet, and you'll slip, and the rope will hold you, but you'll go, face first into the cliff. So I just kind of gathered my courage and said a very brief prayer, which I figured might be my last words, and then I leaned out until my feet were fully in contact with the rock from heel to toe and out perpendicular. And once I achieved that, my feet were actually fully in contact with the rock like that, it was a game changer. It's like, oh, I get it. This feels good now. And it turned this experience that I thought moments before was completely impossible into this exhilarating experience. And suddenly this rock face was not a threat to me. It was something to be explored. And I could I could move around from side to side quite easily. I could even jump from side to side. I could even do that thing you see in the Marine Corps advertisements on TV. I could jump back and then let out a little rope and go down and keep doing that. And I got to the bottom after doing that, and the first thing out of my mouth was, "Can I do it again?" Well, it was awesome. And I learned a lesson that day that I'll never forget, which is that sometimes half measures or trying to play it safe actually put you in greater danger, and they're not as fun. That you actually, when you fully commit, that's when things get not only more fun, but also safer. I've never forgotten that lesson. Well, apparently, the church in Laodicea had forgotten or hadn't learned it yet. They needed to learn it like I needed to learn it. Because Jesus, the Spirit of Jesus in this letter says, would that you be either hot or cold, but you are neither. You are lukewarm, you're tepid. And because you are lukewarm, I spit you out of my mouth. And I spit you out of my mouth. I mean, wow. Pretty harsh language towards this church. Because you're lukewarm, I spit you out of my mouth. The Greek actually makes it even harsher. If you look at the Greek, actually the word there is vomit. I vomit you out of my mouth. In other words, you make me sick. Well, I feel some empathy for these folks for only kind of playing it safe, maybe in their day. I mean, consider the day they're living in. If you were a Christian, you more than likely, out of religious conviction, did not make the yearly sacrifice to the emperor, who demanded that every year you made a sacrifice to him as a god, and you received a certificate of proof that you'd done this, which essentially served as your documentation papers, your citizenship papers, and you needed these things to get a job and to hold a job, to make major transactions and all these things. So if you didn't do it, your life got pretty hard pretty fast. You could lose your job, but you could also do a lot more than that. You could lose your freedom. You could be put into jail, or worse, you could be thrown to the lions or burned at the stake in some circumstances. And that's not a very pretty thought. And so it's like, well, why wouldn't they kind of reel it in a bit? They're not just going to be prancing around, I'm on fire for Jesus in their day. Why? Jesus just sounds like this person with anger management issues, this unrelenting, insensitive taskmaster. Doesn't sound very loving. And yet, the Jesus in this letter actually says he is loving them. He says this. He says, I reprove and discipline those whom I love. Listen, I'm standing at the door knocking. If you hear my voice and open the door, I'll come in and eat with you and you with me. He even says if they'll just kind of get their acts together, he will exalt them in glory in the last days. And he's saying, I really love you, but boy, have I got an issue. This is the one of a couple letters in the series where he only has really negative things to say. Other letters he offers compliments like, hey, but you're doing this right, or you're doing this well. He doesn't have those words for the church in Laodicea. He just says, hey, you're lukewarm. Would you either be hot or cold? I wonder if we could maybe think about how that advice, that stern as it is, that admonition, could be a word of love. I mean, are there areas in your own life, for instance, when you have played it safe and came to regret having done that, having not committed more fully? And conversely, are there areas of your life where you've just gone full in and you've looked back and said, thank God I did. I mean, that was the exact right thing to do. Maybe other people were nervous. Maybe you were nervous, but you went all in on something and that paid off. I'm going to invite you, before we go further, to kind of reflect on your own life. And can you feel that idea of like either be hot, be all in, or be all out, but don't be lukewarm? Where does that work its way out in your own life, as we are joined by Michael Gungor singing a song for us called Beautiful Things.
It's all this pain. I wonder if I'll ever find my way. I wonder if my life could really change at all. All this earth, could all that is lost ever be found? Could a garden come up from this ground at all? You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. It's all around. Hope is springing up from this old ground. Out of chaos, life is being found in you. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. Oh, you make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. Oh, you make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of
You make me new. You are making me new. You make me new. You are making me new. You're making me new.
You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of the dust. You make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. Oh, you make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us. And you make beautiful things. You make beautiful things out of us.
Great stuff. Beautiful Things by Gungor. First saw them at the Wild Goose Festival years ago. Well, what do you think? On Zoom, I asked if anybody had anything that come out of that reflection, and Heidi has said, sure, she's got something to share. So Heidi, I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and What came in that reflection for you?
Yeah, for me, this really struck a chord with, as you know, the concept of vocatio, finding your purpose and using your voice. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, and for me personally, I went from a very um, conservative, socially acceptable job to going into something that was a bit trickier in society. But on some level, I only went halfway in. And when I had an emergency occur in my life, the momentum and the foundation wasn't strong enough to sustain through the crisis. And I really feel as though if I had gone all in and really trusted and didn't let the fear stop me from going, all the way, that the foundation would have been strong enough to sustain what I was doing for a living. That was, having my own business and, all of that. So that's kind of where I went, was when we are called to do something, we're asked to be obedient, and we need to go all in and trust that God is doing this with us. So, and work on the fears that may come up and pop up in our head. So that's what I came up with.
That's great. That's something that's, of course, easy to say we should go all in, but a lot harder to do, huh? Especially
Absolutely.
if there's things like personal finances and things like this on the line, too, and no guarantee of income or what have you. That's tough.
Well, and I also think that when we feel called to do something, that it's a divine pull, that we will get tested. And for me, I have a relative who is very much against the business that I have. And so it's that constant poking and jabbing at, you're a sinner, this isn't good. And it's still staying faithful and being all in, even though you're going to be tested. So you may make the choice to be all in, but that doesn't mean you're also not going to be tested through your faithfulness. So yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. You don't need to reveal this if you don't want to, but you have you want to indicate what profession or what your business is?
Yeah, I'm an astrologer and a psychic medium. And I'm very proud of it. I mean, I feel so close to God and when I am doing these things. But so it's not necessarily socially accepted. And to most people, being a Christian and doing this is an oxymoron. And it's actually, you couldn't be closer to source, in my opinion. So yes, so that's what I do.
That's interesting that we're looking at this church that was, for the Christian beliefs, they were being persecuted by the Romans, and now you are identifying as a Christian who is doing something that Christians now are coming after you. On that's fascinating.
Yeah.
You have kind of this. You have a more deeper connection to this first century church than
it's my stepfather, and he is a devout Catholic, and he just thinks it's sorcery and witchery, and it's just the devil's work, and it's an interesting journey to navigate with a fellow family member.
That's tough. Well, maybe you could tell your Catholic relative that, well, probably you have, that the Pope astrology used to be used in the Catholic Church too. The Pope had astrological signs in his bathtub.
Thank you for that. Yes.
They're actually, the whole Bible is actually full of astrological zodiac references. If you're looking for it too. So. Although I admit, I used to be one of those people too. I thought that was that's evil stuff and all that. And then I sat down with an astrologer, a minister friend, actually, who then read my chart, and and he didn't know me at the time. He became a good friend, and oh my gosh, it blew my mind. And well,
and I really appreciated what you said earlier, because John channeled the voice of Jesus to write these letters. Correct?
Yes.
That really also lines up with all this. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that's that's a whole, I think I would love to do actually some episodes on these things, because I think as Christianity 3.0 is emerging, I think one of the the key aspects is this pluralistic stance that we affirm fully the path of Jesus without denying the legitimacy of other paths that God may create for humanity, and that could be other religions and also other ways of knowing that have been considered in the past to be esoteric or what have you, and are proving to actually have some truth-telling, ability. And I'm one of those people who think that all truth is God's truth. And so if it's something that's actually telling me the truth about something, I'm going to pay attention. I'm not going to say that's an evil thing. I'm going to pay attention because all truth is God's truth. And
And there, as you said, there are so many examples of these abilities that are even, presented by Jesus. His prophetic abilities and his knowing about people. And anyway, so that's interesting, and it sounds like it'd be a great series.
Yeah. Well, good. Thank you, Heidi, for sharing that, and best wishes on your business too. That's tough. I know I've been in my situation myself, where I've been challenged to feel called one way, but how do you go all in or not? And sometimes I think it's a matter of timing too. I mean, we don't have to jump all the way in. Maybe we have to. We got intentional about where we're headed, but we were going to take some more gradual steps so that we're not putting ourselves at unusual risk if we have mortgage payments and kids to feed or what have you. So.
Right.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we're going to move on to a little. I want to give you a little historical background on Laodicea, and thank you for sharing, Heidi. So the Laodicea is, as I mentioned, about 100 miles inland from Ephesus on the western coast of Turkey, and it sat in this interesting area. It was on a high ridge in between two mountain valleys. And from Laodicea, you could see a couple of famous spots. One is Colossae, as in Paul's letter to the Colossians. And also you could see this town in the distance called Hierapolis, which was a hot springs city. And if you've ever been there, I've been there a couple times, and it's amazing. It's mind-blowing, actually. It's got so much mineral salts that have built up that if you look at it from a distance, and those of you on Zoom are seeing a Hierapolis in the distance from Laodicea, it looks like it's a ski slope. But it's actually all these mineral salts and these pools, these hot springs pools that are formed inside the salt deposits. And it's pretty interesting. But the reason I mention this is because water, the water system for the Laodiceans was not ideal. It actually came from a hot springs several miles away in the mountains, so across the mountain valley. The mineral water came out just piping hot, boiling hot, and then it was carried through an aqueduct for several miles, went down the mountain, across the valley, and then up and into Laodicea. So by the time it got to the bottom of the mountain, it had so much force behind it, it was actually able to get up over the smaller incline to get up into Laodicea. Kind of this wild act of, I guess, siphoning would be the term. But the point is, by the time it got to Laodicea, this hot water was no longer hot at all. But it wasn't cold either. It was, you can guess it, lukewarm. It was tepid. And I imagine, most of us know what tepid water is like when you drink it. It's like the one form of water that does not taste good. It's gross. You do want to, I can imagine Jesus wanting to spit it out of his mouth. Hot water, boiling water, that's great. You can brew coffee, you can brew tea. Cold water, fantastic for refreshing and waking you up. But tepid water just tastes terribly. Nobody wants that. And certainly nobody in Laodicea would have wanted it either, but that was the only way they could get water to them, unless you were going to descend the their hill and go into the valley where there was a river there. But the water inside the city, you did not move to Laodicea for the water. You moved despite the water. Well, Heidi's given us a really, really fascinating example of how this, so anyway, but I could say that message really hit home literally. Then you either be hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I spit you out or vomit you out. That really resonated on many different levels for the Laodiceans. And but in terms of this being hot or cold, that Jesus would prefer you be hot or cold. There's many areas of life where this principle holds true. If you're a skier or a snowboarder, you know that if you're going down a mountain at a good clip, the more you try to tightly control your body movements, the less safe you are, and you're not having any fun whatsoever. You need to relax. You need to then give your body fully to the mountain and lean into the curves and let your body go with the slope. That's when you're not only having fun, but you're in far better control of your skiing than if you're trying to control it overly, if you're only kind of halfway committed to it. Same thing if you've been a business owner like Heidi is, that the road, if you're going to be half-hearted about in terms of starting your business, that's the road to bankruptcy, not to success. So would you be hot or cold? Either you get in or stay out until you're ready to get in fully. If you're a musician, you know that you're never going to electrify an audience unless, if you're phoning it in, if you're just kind of going through the ropes, if you're half-hearted about it, nobody's going to respond to you. Or if you've been in a romantic relationship where perhaps you were ready to tie the knot, but your partner just couldn't quite get up the nerve. You know how that can just be destructive for a relationship. Now these days, a lot of people talk about how exhausted they are, and for some people that means they're getting a lot. They're severely sleep deprived, but a lot of people actually are exhausted no matter how much sleep they get. Have you ever had that experience where you're getting plenty of sleep, but you're just exhausted doing what you're doing? Well, likely you're exhausted then because you're not connected in some way to what you're doing. You're half-hearted about it. You're not being wholehearted about what you're doing. Maybe it's not interesting enough. You're in a job that is just boring the tears out of you. You're not intellectually engaged or emotionally engaged or spiritually engaged or what have you. And so you're just kind of going through the ropes or the motions. And it doesn't take a lot of energy expenditure in these situations to actually produce deep exhaustion. So, and oftentimes the solution to exhaustion is wholeheartedness. It's not just simply getting more sleep. And that works also if you're on fire, you're fully engaged, but you're in a context where maybe all your colleagues aren't. That's exhausting too. You're putting out, you're fully committed, but those around you who are part of your closest support group are not. Helen Keller had a great observation in this regard. She said once, security is mostly a superstition. Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature. Avoiding danger, she said, is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Yeah. Life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Now, I could see this church in Laodicea there. They are stressed. They've been traumatized. So I have empathy for these people, even though they make Jesus sick. I could see why they would not want to display their Christianity. They would not want to act out much on it because they're in danger. But I think this is where it's important to recognize that if this voice in the book of Revelation is truly coming from Jesus or from God or the Holy Spirit or what have you, that there's an important note here. The Spirit or Jesus is saying, that you either be hot or cold, but don't be lukewarm. So in other words, be all in for me or don't be. He'd actually prefer that. He'd prefer that. Just don't follow me. And I don't think that's a criticism. I think it's because of the compassion here that if you're going to be a Christian in those days, you weren't following through with your faith, then you incurred all the risk of being a Christian with like none of the reward. Like, if you're just going to show up and sing the songs and pray the prayers and say all kinds of nice things about Jesus, but never actually put your faith into action, that's just not a fulfilling way to be a Christian at all. And so why take on the risk for something that's not going to be fulfilling no matter how much you do it? That's what he's saying. Like just get out. It's okay. I mean, I really sincerely believe that Jesus would have preferred that you be a passionate pagan over a tepid Christian. Right? Don't be a lukewarm Christian. Be a on-fire Zeus worshiper. I mean, there's that saying that a boat can't be steered unless it's in motion. If you're dead in the water, you can't go anywhere. But at least if you're hot on fire for something and something in a spiritual direction, the Spirit can work with that, right? So yeah, be a on-fire Zeus worshiper if you're not willing to then put your faith into practice and gain the benefits and rewards of and the satisfactions of doing that. I think it's just a really important message as we kind of emerge into Christianity 3.0 is that it's okay also not to be a Christian. There are other ways that the Spirit can work in and through you, and Christianity is going to require a lot of you to like love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who persecute you. I mean, you're loving people who make you uncomfortable, giving astonishingly like just crazy levels of grace out. If you're going to follow this person, being unusually forgiving, being unusually gracious, and really called to help heal the hurts of the world. And if you're not willing to go all in, then it's a pretty exhausting path. So you choose another one, and maybe you'll stick with that one, or maybe you'll find that wasn't as exciting and fulfilling as you thought. So you'll find your way back. Either way, the Spirit can work with a boat in motion. So, but I'm going to also say that I don't like when I think about churches today, I'm not thinking about too many people. I know the evangelicals are fond of saying how persecuted they are and so forth. And I do think they have some point in the sense of like Christianity is not exactly much for public discussion and so forth. But no, we're not persecuted like this. And Christianity has been more responsible for persecution than persecuting in recent history and even going back quite far. But I do think that there are other ways that a church or a community of Christians can fall into the same trap of Laodicea. That is, and especially in the progressive Christian tradition, which I come from, and that is through actually caring about so much, like every hurt in the world where people are having troubles, caring and trying to be, help out in all these ways. There's a lot of churches who care, I think, too much. And I don't mean like caring itself is wrong. No, in fact, I really hope that churches will care hugely, but they care too much about too many things. I mean, that's the better way to put it. Instead of like caring about one or two things and then doing an excellent job of caring for one or two communities who are hurting, they keep piling on. There's that one or two, and then there's another one or two, and there's another one or two. There's this issue, there's this issue, there's this issue. I mean, in the world, there's more than enough hurts to go around. There's more than enough injustice to go around. And if you keep on saying we must respond to each one of these forms of injustice, pretty soon you're not doing a lot of good for anybody. You're doing very little good for a lot of people. And that's exhausting because you're always then in a half-hearted response. Instead of, giving $10,000 to a certain, cause, you're giving $200 because you've spent, you're spending all your money in all these other, things, or $500. You're not doing a lot of good. You're just kind of giving a little dribble of help. And I think there is a reason for that. Really for the last couple hundred years, Christianity has been, I would say, corrupted by almost single-handedly by one man, Immanuel Kant. I am like Immanuel Kant's least favorite, least enthusiastic student. Kant had this idea that you should not gain any personal benefit from doing good in the world, that actually you should be responding out of duty and doing that, actually helping those for whom you're getting nothing. Like the less you get out of it personally, the more righteous you're being. So he was very much about like doing acts of goodness and justice and so forth, but not benefiting personally from any of that. And I just think he was dead wrong. And I think probably so would Howard Thurman, one of my favorite theologians of the last century. He was once asked by his students at Harvard, like, how do I find my calling in life? Do I need to like go to where the world is hurting the most or what? And he responded this way. He said, don't ask yourself what the world needs. What? Don't ask? I thought as a Christian, I'm supposed to ask what the world needs. I mean, where's the hurt? And he said, don't ask what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Yeah. It's like the opposite of Kant. Like, find what gives you joy to do, and go do that. Now, he was not anybody who knows anything about Howard Thurman knows he was a selfish person. He was somebody who was deeply committed to making the world a better place. But he was committed to doing so in ways that lit him up, that actually turned him on, that made him want to be fully engaged, not half-heartedly engaged. Because when you're doing something that's really not off to the side of what your soul considers important, but right on the heat of it, that's a sustainable thing. You are going to be thinking about this action or these people you're helping or this thing you're doing in the world, night and day, and you're going to do it gladly. So it's sustainable. But if you're just going to go do it because, well, you were guilted into doing it because it's your duty to do it and so forth, you'll help out a little bit and you'll do some good. Wouldn't argue that, but it's not sustainable. It's exhausting. It's just plain exhausting. So I like to talk about finding your sweet spot and then acting from that sweet spot. Tennis rackets, golf clubs, baseball bats. They all have cricket mallets. They all have sweet spots. They have this, like on a tennis racket, it's that place just off of center where when the ball impacts the racket, the vibrations that are sent through the racket towards the edges exactly cancel each other out, so that all the power that went into hitting the racket is translated one for one into sending the ball back and over the net. Whereas if you're not hitting in your sweet spot, a lot of that energy is absorbed by the racket itself. And so when you've hit that sweet spot on the racket, because it feels almost effortless, like you hardly even know you hit the ball. It just makes it so easy. And when you're doing that, it's a lot more fun when you can find that sweet spot and hit it. And you're also exercising gradient control. You're actually investing your energies into sending the ball to where you want it to be, rather than simply absorbing all the energy in the racket. And people have sweet spots. God has created us each a bit differently, with different passions, different things that our soul needs to get out of this life to be fulfilled. And you're kind of acting in that sweet spot when these actions bring you joy, and that's actually hard to exhaust you. You might work 10 times harder than the next person, but you're not feeling nearly the exhaustion level because you're not being depleted in any way. Your soul is attached to your work. You've found that way of being in the world when it just starts to come naturally, and you'll struggle, but you're willing to engage in those struggles because these are the struggles that are yours to engage in. They're ones where you could work really hard and be hit around and beat around a lot, but it's worth it to you. They don't get you down because your soul is benefiting very directly through those actions. And we all have to trust that we do what we do, and then we know that other people have other sweet spots. So if there's I know, like in my own ministerial profession, I mean, that's in my sweet spot. But also, there's other things. It's not just like one sweet spot. There's other things that resonate with me, and certain social justice causes, for instance. But I found early on in my ministry that I needed to really get clear about what does bring me alive, and so I needed to find like one or two outside kind of more social justice causes to involve myself in, where I could do it with excellence, and then say no to everything else, even though I cared. Like, so early on, I chose pluralism and LGBTQ equality. And in doing so, it meant if anybody ever asked me for help in these areas, I made sure I could say yes, because I'd also said no to all these other causes that people kept asking me to be involved in. And that's tough. I mean, if there were issues of poverty, there were issues of reproductive rights, there were issues, all kinds of things that I cared about sincerely and think other people should care about sincerely. But in order to make sure that I could say yes to these other things and not deplete my energies, not just do a little bit of good for a lot, I really want to do a lot of good for a few. And so throughout my ministries, I've always kind of kept it isolated to areas of outside interest beyond my congregation, and I'll say no to everything else. And sometimes people don't understand that. They go, "Oh, you're so cold." And like, yes, I'm actually being cold towards that, not emotionally, not like I don't support that, but I'm going to be cold in terms of my actions. So this is an example of where being hot or cold is a good thing. Like, be hot or be cold. Actually, being cold is a way of following Jesus too, because it means you have the energy to be hot for the things that you are specifically being called into doing. Well, we're going to wrap up in a bit. But I do want to note that here's where this emerging Christianity 3.0 is starting to show some, as we've gone through the letters to these churches, is starting to show some common themes. We've been looking at, like, how do I as an individual then best use my energies, do the things that light me up inside. We talked when we were in the church of Thyatira, we talked about actually how really whole ministries, like if you actually have found your sweet spot, if you've found that that brings you alive, and you're devoting like your full-time attention, it's not just simply your additional time, but your full-time attention to this pursuit. Like, take auto mechanics. If you love to work on cars, and this is what brings you alive in the world, and you're doing like what I mentioned the Muslim brothers were doing in the church of when we covered the Thyatira, the Muslim brothers who I encountered in my life who said, we repair every car as if Muhammad himself is going to drive away in it. And consequently, they had this fabulous car repair shop, and they treated their customers with great dignity as well as the cars. If you're in that sweet spot mode and you are treating the recipients of your labors as if they are the founders of your religion, that's a ministry. You never have to preach Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. That's a ministry. And so with Christianity 3.0, I could see ministers of auto mechanics, ministers of rock and roll, ministers of, wherever people have found their sweet spots. If they're going to do this, as their vocation, we should actually commission them as ministers who are doing this on behalf of our communities. Same thing then with we kind of ratchet it down in like the volunteer work we do in our communities of faith. Don't do stuff just because you've been guilted into it. In the churches I've been serving, lately, I've been asking the congregation what I call the golden question, which is, what do you love doing so much that you'd gladly do it for free if you were asked? And collecting all this from everybody we can in the congregation. What do you love to do? So that you can find common themes in what people love to do. Say, okay, well, how can we actually leverage what people love to do on behalf of the ministry of Jesus Christ? Realizing that if people love to do it, it's probably hitting them spiritually on some level. And it may not look overtly spiritual, but certainly it is, because people love to do it and they keep loving. They gladly do it for free. That is a spiritual thing. So, for instance, last year I was serving this wonderful little church in Niantic, Connecticut, and we asked the congregation the golden question: what do you love to do? And people filled that out. And I noticed there was a number of people who loved to do gourmet cooking. Okay, well, why not then leverage this on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ. If people love to do it, they'd gladly do it if we asked them, instead of like being browbeat into doing stuff. Let's try that. So I was teaching a confirmation class with the associate minister at the time, and it was that typical, you meet on a Wednesday evening, and one of the families gets chosen to bring in the cold pizza box, pizza, and people just kind of chow down on this cold pizza for dinner. That was a real drag. Well, when I found out there's a lot of people who love to cook gourmet meals, I contacted them and said, hey, how would you love to cook a gourmet meal for our confirmation class? We eat every Wednesday. How about every Wednesday we find people will make gourmet meals for the class? And you know what? It was really easy to find volunteers. And the food quality then went through the roof. Every Wednesday we're having this fabulous meal. The people loved to do it. And boy, those kids, did they ever feel valued by our community and loving the food. And it was interesting because as soon as we made that change, right at that time, they actually opened up to us more deeply than ever before. It's like, yeah, we signaled that we valued them. So, they were going to value us. They were going to honor us in return by actually opening up a little bit more of their lives to us. That's what we need to be doing with Christianity 3.0 congregations. Let's ask everybody the golden question and figure out, okay, here's how the Spirit is talking to these people in this congregation. Here's the things they love to do. So now let's figure out ways to do good in the community using those skills and interests. Maybe you've got a lot of people who love to do gardening. Well, you could at least get a group of people who will take care of maybe some of the grounds, the building and grounds, right? Or maybe you take on a community gardening project. You create a garden in your community for people who maybe in a food desert or so. So there's all kinds of things you can do when you identify what people love to do. Then finally, you're not just asking and feeling kind of guilty for asking them. You're asking them, and actually you're feeling like, well, they should thank you. Like they're saying, I love it so much, I'd do it for free if I was asked. I'd gladly do it. So yes, could you please do this? And you're welcome. That changes the energy. And when I found when a congregation consistently commits to don't do anything that you feel like it's a drag for you, but do only those things, volunteer for only those things that you love. What happens is, well, first of all, they have a good time. They love it. And when their friends say, hey, you see you're doing this for the church. Somebody just asked me to do the similar thing. You're like, what do you think? Is this a good thing? And they're like, oh, I love this. It's far easier to raise up church leaders when the church leaders themselves are fully engaged in what they're doing and loving it. Then they model that, and they encourage other people to get involved as well. Christianity 3.0, going beyond Immanuel Kant and do only those things that you do not like to do, that you gain no personal benefit from, to being quote unquote selfish by doing the things you love to do that are then you do with excellence, that nobody feels guilty asking you to do, and that is sustainable. Well, we are at the end of our time this evening. It's been great to have you with us on this journey. And so we will be off next week. I'll be traveling, but I'm going to do some kind of a one-off things, not quite sure where the future is going with this, but we've had a good enough time in this series to know I want to continue doing the Convergent Paths, kind of this reboot of it. And on November 3rd, the Sunday night, we will have at 7 o'clock Eastern, Rabbi Brian Mayer will be joining us, who is an incredible rabbi in Portland, Oregon, who has written a book called Rabbi Brian's Highly Unorthodox Gospel, which is a great book. And I want to acknowledge that Mark online has said, my brother committed to cooking for the homeless at a church in the University District of Seattle. I can't read the whole, there we go. I always enjoyed helping make a tuna casserole with potato chip topping. It was always a hit with those eating the dinner. I'm just finishing up selling my business and retired. I'm looking for that sweet spot. Thank you for tonight. You've helped me on my path. Well, you're very welcome, Mark, and good luck with that sweet spot. And I look forward, when I'm in the Seattle area, to having dinner with you. Great. Well, it's been a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to close with the blessing I offer every week, and accompanied to some crystal singing bowls that were recorded in the woods of around Portland, Oregon. Now, my friends, may the Spirit, the Holy Spirit of the living God, made known to us as Christians most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong and constant companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone in this journey, and you are loved, loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you and through you, now and always. Amen. Good night. See you in a couple of weeks.